Hello, everybody. It's Alex once again from Remote Work Life. Welcome and thanks for joining me. And today I have, yet another special guest. As I mentioned to you before, we only bring the best guests onto the Remote Work Life podcast. And today I have with me Job van der Voort. And Job is the CEO and co-founder of Remote. Job previously worked as a neuroscientist, believe it or not, before leaving academia to become the VP of product at GitLab, which, as you may or may not know, is the world's largest all-remote company. He hired talent in 67 different countries. So that's immense. So we're going to learn a little bit about that today. Job is also a highly sought-after presenter. He speaks on topics relating to scaling a remote-first startup, remote culture, and the future of work. So, yeah, ideal guest to have on the podcast. Job also has 2 kids and 500 hobbies. And, I need to ask Job about that because 500 hobbies, puts me to shame. But Job, thank you for joining me today and you're welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
So welcome. So, I've been waiting quite a while for this moment as we've, I think you started Remote around about 2019, around about the same time that I started the Remote Work Life podcast. And I suppose, quite frankly, it's exploded in terms of interest, in terms of uptake. I just want to say, as I said, thank you for joining me, but tell me, how did you get to this point? Did you envision yourself in this role when you were at GitLab, for example?
Yeah, funny story. I was doing a different job before GitLab where I met Sid, the CEO, and he asked me, "Oh, do you want to join me at GitLab?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll join you, but I kind of want to start my own company, so I'll join you for a year." And then I'm gonna leave. And that year turned into 5 years. So in a way, I did envision running my own company at least, because that was explicitly my goal, even by the time that I joined GitLab. And like between Steli and I, we always had an agreement that I would join and then I would leave. And that was always the agreement. And so, I stayed for 5 years and I told him, "Look, now's the time. I told you this was going to happen. Now I'm going to go." So in a way, yes. I would never imagine myself, leading such a large, maybe it's too early to tell, but relatively successful company. So no.
And I think, you obviously had, like you said, you had that goal in your mind. So it sounds like, and from some of the interviews I've listened to, you sound like, maybe, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, a bit of a risk here, but you sound like you're the kind of person who really knows what they want and you go after it and you plan out what you want and you approach things from that perspective. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, no, you're right. I've been always very clear on what I want, although that thing has changed many times. I don't know what I want to do, after Remote, if they kick me out. But no, I've been always incredibly stubborn about what I want to do, and I've always just gone straight for that. So yeah, yes.
Well, that's a good point. It's a good guess. But no, and we're going to talk. For those of you listening today, we're going to really dig into. Obviously, we're going to be talking about remote work. We're going to be talking about asynchronous work as well, and working asynchronously within your teams. But as you all know, I like to get under the skin really and really understand the people behind the businesses. And to that, as I was saying before, I listened to a few of Job's interviews. And yeah, how was your time? What I suppose I wanted to know is, how was your time at GitLab? What did it teach you?
A lot of things. It was 5 years, so it's a lot of time, and the company grew really fast. The first year at GitLab, we were initially not even planning to raise any VC money, and we thought we're just going to bootstrap this. And a year later, we were in Y Combinator. We went through that whole experience, and a lot. I learned how. I think the most fundamental thing is that I learned that you can do this. You can build a truly distributed team, have people all over the world, and build a very successful company. And I think in a lot of ways, a company that, for one, breaks the mold, but also does many things significantly better and not necessarily because of choice, but more because as an emergent property of the fact that we didn't have any offices, we ended up hiring from all over the world and ended up with a very diverse team. I think that in and of itself has so many advantages for any kind of organization. And it's such a great forcing function to better practices like asynchronous work and many others that, I think that laid the foundation on what I was going to do next, right? Like I think the reason that remote exists is because I saw the problems we faced at GitLab and are trying to solve that at remote, but also because I believe that, okay, you can build these kind of organizations. And I want to help more people create organizations like this. And in doing so, give more people the opportunity to work for those kind of organizations. So yeah, a whole lot. GitLab taught me a whole lot. I wouldn't say everything, but a whole lot.
No, nice summary. But what's the biggest takeaway from you from GitLab? What's the biggest thing you've probably learned from your time there?
I mean, it's what I said. It's the fact that you can do this, that you can build this truly distributed company, and that it has massive advantages, right? Like that is easily the best one. I think when we were building GitLab, we often faced people being skeptic about the fact that we were fully remote and fully distributed. It was seen as a very controversial thing to do, something that was very rare and exceptional, and like only certain kind of the questions were always the same, like, oh, only certain kind of people, or you don't collaborate, or it's just because you're building this kind of company, or a million others, really. Like, for example, we knew at GitLab, oh, we were not a good acquisition target because we didn't have an office in San Francisco, so it would be very hard to acquire us. All of those things, they seemed super controversial at the time, but while in GitLab, it seemed so incredibly obvious that this was working. Yeah, that was the takeaway.
No, that's cool. And you're remote now. You started remote, and everything seems to be going really well. And you're hiring and growing different entities across the world. In terms of remote, how are things going at remote at the moment for you?
I think pretty well. It's running companies really, really hard. And remote grew from, I think a year ago, we had 40 or 50 employees. Today we have 500 something. So that's a lot. It's really hard to build some kind of structure, organization, and to make people even understand what their job is when you're growing this incredibly fast. And so the reason that we grew so fast is because there's so much demand, right? We have thousands of customers. And so, yeah, those two things together, that's really difficult. I think from the outside, and if you look at the numbers, we are quite a successful company. I think on the inside, sometimes it feels like everything else on fire, but it's also a little bit the way it goes with the startup. I think generally everybody that works as remote is working really hard to build something really, really good. Yeah, I would give us an 8 out of 10 so far.
That's okay. And the thing I've noticed about you, very are you the kind of person as well who just really absorbs challenges and just takes things as they come, or are you somebody who just really foresees what might happen and can prepare for those things?
Well, I think a bit of both, right? In a startup, the reality is, and for any problem set, most of the things that you think are complex, you figure out in advance, and the real hard things you encounter while you're doing it, right? And the same goes with the startup. So I had all these grand visions about particular parts of how we were going to do things, and some of them really panned out, and some of them were still very much building. And I first saw them years ago, and others I had never imagined that those were complex things that we would, trip over 6 times before we were able to fix them. So, I would say a bit of both, which I think is necessary in a startup. You need to have a long-term vision, but you also need to be able to deal with the day-to-day.
And what about, because in different podcasts, I hear you talking a lot about remote, but what about you and your career? You've talked through some of the challenges you've had so far with remote, but what about your career? For you, what have been the personal challenges that you've had in your career that you've had to overcome?
I don't know. I always like to say that I'm not a very good example or story to listen to in that sense, because as we were saying early on, is that I like challenges and I overcome them by force of will. So I don't feel like I think I've had struggles like everybody else, but I never felt like, wow, that was like a major hard thing to come out to get over. As I was saying, I think it's very hard to build a company. I think that is probably the biggest challenge so far, career-wise.
Fair enough. And it's a nice challenge to have that success. You're in, is it 67 entities now, you said, right?
No, but we are around 60 or so that we have right now, and it's growing really fast. I think we'll be around 80 before the end of the year. So we're adding a lot these last 2 months of the year.
And for those who don't know about remote, just could you give us just like an overview of what remote is all about? I mean, I know, but I don't want to bore people with my information. So you tell us.
It's very simple. If you have a company and you want to hire someone in a different country than where you have that company, we can solve that for you. We take care of payroll, we take care of compliance, taxes, and anything else that comes with it. That is what remote does, and that's what we solve. And we solve that in a million different ways. We solve that for contractors, for direct employees, or employees that are employed through us, through an employer of record kind of structure. Any kind of form, really, and anything that comes with that as well, payroll, benefits, but also more complicated things than that. We solve all of that, which is a lot, and it's really, really complex, but fundamentally it just solves that one problem. You want to hire someone in a different country, we solve that.
And you do that by API. How does that work then? Because I mean, I get the concept, but you do that via API. Can you explain that a bit more?
No, so the way we do it is by blood, sweat, and tears. It's you have to figure out, like, let's say I want to hire Jane in Portugal, right? I have to then go into Portugal, figure out what are the local labor laws like. How do I employ someone? How do I run payroll locally? So we do this for every country in the world. And in doing so, we have to build software to automate the processes involved with onboarding Jane and all their other friends. So we build all this software, which is this really complicated stack of software that does a million different things. And we make it available directly through our customers so that you can just sign up and you don't have to talk to someone, but rather you're just guided through this onboarding thing. Or we make available APIs so that if you're a partner of ours, you can offer the same kind of functionality. So you can say, well, you can employ people through us, but really through remote. And there's this API available that we then use to integrate with remote. That is really what that is.
Amazing. Like you said, it's got so many different moving parts, but you've managed to package it in such a way that you've been able to scale so quickly, and you must have a wonderful team.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the, did you, and I mean, I know obviously everybody's been forced to work remotely, and some are liking it, some others aren't, and it's, you're having lots of clients on board. Did you anticipate the sort of the success that you're having now? Did you anticipate the numbers?
No, I didn't. I also didn't anticipate COVID. So which I think is a major boon, and like one of the main ways that this massive shift to remote work happened, right? So no, I didn't anticipate it. We started seeing it when COVID started happening. It was very clear that this was going to be an accelerating trend, right? So when COVID happened, it's not that there was immediately a boom of demand. The demand was already there, and we were already serving part of that. But I mean, we weren't actually, because we only opened the doors after COVID, but nonetheless, we were anticipating that amount, that we were speaking with potential customers for a long time. But what we did anticipate is that once people start working remotely, they start to realize that, oh, I can just hire internationally. So instead of just hiring, in my country or even in a neighborhood in which I have an office. And now I think we're starting to see that demand realize, right? Now you start to see more and more jobs opening that have location anywhere. And that is what we were anticipating, a year and a half ago. But not before that, absolutely not. No, I think, I thought we would be successful. I knew that this was like an interesting market. I knew we could be successful in this. I didn't anticipate us within 2 years to have a company with 500 employees now.
It's incredible. It's beyond sort of like, yeah, it's incredible. That's the only word I can think of right now. And obviously being, fast forwarding to where you are now to 500 employees, leadership obviously comes into it. You as not just a founder, but there has to be so many facets to the way you work and who you are in order to have a successful company with that scale. What would you say is probably the most significant or most important leadership lesson that you've learned?
Oh, good question. I don't know. I think it's hire great people and give them the space to be great. I think that's one of the most important things. You'll find that if you hire someone that's ambitious and hungry, as they say, right, wants to get shit done, and you give them the space to do so, they tend to be excellent people, and they tend to do really, really well. And I think that's how I am as a leader. I tell all my reports that you have the playground to yourself. You get to do your best work. I will make sure you're unblocked. You have anything you need, money, people, whatever else. Just show me your best work. And that tends to work out really, really well.
Okay, the reason I'm laughing is because I've worked in recruitment for a number of years myself. And you said just hire the best people. That's the end game. You want to hire the best people, but I think the principles of recruiting and hiring people, they're pretty much there. They're not set in stone, but it's pretty straightforward to follow those principles. But it's easier to sort of like, the practice of recruiting and hiring the right people is the challenge. What's the remote way or the job way of hiring people and making sure that they're aligned with what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think it starts a little bit earlier than that. I think you have to create a company culture or a place where like talented people will want to work, right? To create a really safe, inclusive environment is a really important one. I think it's important to almost everybody that I think is great. So that's a pretty good start, right? Like, and even if you want to hire like a white guy from San Francisco, creating an inclusive environment is also going to do better for them, right? Like that's a really good place to start. And then you create an atmosphere that is pleasant for them as well. Like if you're a micromanager, that they will get that sense from you, from your organization, in talking with your organization. Like nobody wants to work for a micromanager. So that's where it starts. And then, like there's no such thing as the best person in any given thing. One way you're definitely not going to find it is by looking at someone's CV and counting the years of experience they have in X or Y, right? Like it's not how you find someone great at all. It's quite the opposite. I think you're going to find someone that's incredibly rigid and very like expecting a particular thing if they're spend a lot of time. So I think really what you're looking for is like, what is the kind of person that matches our organization, matches what I like to, the type of person that I like to work with, right? And this is often described as cultural, but it's also, how people select people that look like themselves. So I'm careful not to use that, but how, looking for that person that matches well with you and with the greater organization. And then of course has some relevant experience. And what I find is that one of the best predictors if someone is successful at remote, not going to make any judgments with other companies, but at remote, is someone that is very kind, hardworking, and just very smart. And then experience in the relevant place in which we're hiring them into, it's definitely important and it's going to help them a lot, but it's not the solution to the hiring fit, right? The fit is going to be fully determined by all the other things, assuming they have the experience that they need to be able to do the job. And that's how you hire the best people. And so that means sometimes, we have people that don't have many years of experience in a particular function, but because now they finally have, they're getting the trust, they're getting the space to do the best work. That is why they succeed at remote. And so, yeah, I think a very large part, if not my entire team, is exactly people like that. I've never been CEO. So far, it's going pretty well. So I think that, that's what I was thinking about. It's like, I'm also new to this job. So like, let's all figure it out together. I don't necessarily have to hire people that can redo the thing that they have been doing in the past.
Love that principle, love that way of looking at recruitment. And I think I've interviewed many people who work remotely. I've spoken to many people, especially those who hire and make the decisions. And I think it's very different. The way that remote companies hire, the tactics might be similar to sort of office-based hiring, but the thought process is completely, it's far removed. It's so much more. It's like you said, it's more about the person. The CV is not people are still so hung up on resumes and CVs, and don't look beyond the CV. And I think that's something that I can categorically say that remote businesses do better than any other. So yeah, I love that. Love it. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges actually I come across here, and in fact myself, when I was well, I worked remotely myself, and there was a point where I became very isolated in my career, and perhaps got so focused on work that I didn't reach out as much as I should do. I just got my head down and did my work, and that was it.
Yeah.
Then I realized, you know, I've got to do a bit more. I've got to be a bit more sort of out there. I've got to speak to people, and I've got to continue. I like to continue to learn, and that my inquisitive nature is what really sort of took me to that place where I was learning a bit more. But what's your approach to not just yourself continue your own development, but also for your team as well? What's your approach to, you know, learning and development to keep moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on like what part of the organization, what kind of person you're talking about, right? Like I think it's very different for the people that report up to me directly are all executives who have a very different kind of, you know, path than, you know, an individual contributor in the organization. I think, you know, as an organization as a whole, there's a few things you want to do. One is you want to make sure that for any given role, there's a career path available to them, right? Whatever that might be. And it might be, you know, moving up in the organization, so becoming a manager or a manager of managers, or moving, you know, horizontally to a different function, or just at like a different seniority, right? And all of those have to be available to anybody in the organization. If there isn't, they're going to leave eventually because they want to make steps up in their career. And like, and they also want that recognition, like I am growing and I'm getting better, so I want to actually move up in roles. So that's one, which is like setting the framework. And then you want to make sure that everybody has a manager that understands that part of their role is to help their reports grow and like grow in their function and grow in their capabilities and how good they are. And that, you know, and wants them to succeed and can help them in succeeding. And like, again, this is an organizational structure trick, but like if the people have too many reports, they can't do that, right? Which is more acceptable, but nonetheless unacceptable. More acceptable higher in the organization. But definitely, you know, if you are an individual contributor, your manager should have time for you. Like they should have time for you. And then beyond that, as an organization, you want to provide opportunities to learn and to develop yourself. And it can be in all sorts of ways, right? Like both internally as well as externally, through making available budgets, through coaching them to become leaders, for example, by offering courses and whatever else and internal things with that. We have a learning and development team side of remote, so growing. You know, the company is not that old, so. But yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think that is what is most important. That there's many different ways that you do this, that you support people's growth within an organization, and sometimes outside of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. And talking about the team, obviously. Continued learning is an important thing. I'm sure you hire people who probably work remotely. Do you hire generally people who have not worked remotely, who've not worked asynchronously before as well, or?
Yeah, we don't care. We don't care about that. We just hire whoever we want to hire. I think if you can communicate well, you can work remotely. Mm-hmm. That's it. I don't feel really strongly about it. Yeah. Otherwise, one, you're just gonna shoot yourself in the foot, and two, why block the opportunity to otherwise great people? Like, it's not like they have an office to go to, so they have no choice. Yeah, and it's not to say that like people won't struggle; they might struggle, but we provide sufficient resources and coaching, and again, like we have good structure in the organization to make sure that you can succeed, and there are resources for you to succeed. And then if it still doesn't work out for whatever reason, that's unfortunate, but also luckily very rare.
And one of those things that maybe people have to adapt to, and I think more and more in the future, is working asynchronously. And for you, why? Because I mean, this is something I think obviously it's gonna grow. It's people talking about it a lot more now, obviously, than they used to talk about it. People like yourself, you're I guess are seen as go-to people now in terms of talking about it and advising on it. But in your view, why should leaders care about adopting async work practices?
Well, if they don't, their businesses will fail. So I think that's a pretty good reason why they should care about it. No, the reality is very simple. If you don't pay attention to this, if you don't start working asynchronously, if you are a remote company, or even if you're not, you're going to be in meetings all day. That's it, right? Like I think asynchronous work or like working asynchronously is presented as this like magical thing that's going to solve all your problems. But the reality is, it's just, a few good standards around how you should communicate that help you also avoid meetings and that help you avoid overhead or completely unnecessary, which is sort of implied in overhead that everybody would be happy to go without. And so you have no choice as a business leader unless everybody wants to be in meetings all day, which no one wants to be. You have to start working asynchronously. Wait, I don't know if I answered your question. I did say what I wanted to say.
No, it does. And the thing is that I think lots of people, I mean, I'm looking at my peer group now, and people who perhaps are not used to working remotely, it's almost, there's a block, I guess, a mindset block, I think, in the sense that people still feel as though if they are in a meeting, that they're doing things, they're getting things done, and therefore they add more and more meetings to the diary, which I just find just something that I can't get over. And it seems as though that people are not necessarily thinking about, or even, I don't know, thinking that asynchronous work can be easily adopted. Is it something that can be easily adapted? I know you said each team and each business has to have its own way and its own way of working, but how easy? Actually, that's a difficult question to answer. Instead of that, I'll ask you: how should leaders approach trying to address an over-dependence on meetings?
Stop having meetings. That's the trick. Stop having meetings and just try to write things to each other. That's it. There's nothing more to it. That's the whole secret. It's just stop having those meetings. Like, just consider for a moment, do we need to have this meeting? Is this valuable to have? Like, and there's a few very simple rules you can follow. One, are you just sharing information? Don't have the meeting. No point to have a meeting at all. Just massive overhead and delaying particular kind of information. Rule number two, if you have a meeting, make sure it has a clear agenda. Everybody has seen it in advance and everybody contributes to it. And then you can just add on top of that a million different things just for meetings by itself. But like if you say, well, we want to stop over relying on meetings, stop having those meetings and like find other ways. You will literally be forced to find other ways to communicate with each other. And if you're remote, and especially if you're distributed, so you're not all working at the same time, then that other ways means you have to write stuff down somewhere or record it, right? Like speak it into the air, into a Loom video, whatever else. And the moment you do that, you're working asynchronously, right? It's like there's a trap you can fall into, which is to say, well, we're going to stop having meetings, but now we're just all chatting on Slack all the time, and everybody's expected to be online at the same time because we are really bad at sharing information. And I think that's actually likely that you're going to fall into the trap if you're just immediately going to stop having meetings. But if you think about for a few minutes, what if we write things down in a place where they belong, in appropriate context, and make it so that they are non-ephemeral, right? Slack being ephemeral, the messages disappear essentially once they're out of sight. And then we put things in a Notion page or in our project management tool or whatever else. You're working asynchronously. That's it. That's the solution. Nobody wants to be in meetings all day. And like the few times that you are in meetings, you should spend that time, enjoying seeing each other and having an interesting conversation like we are. But how to address it: stop having those meetings and then figure out other ways. Create a single source of truth for all information and write stuff down there.
Mm-hmm. And I know you said write things down. Lots of other, well, I say lots, but people are adopting things like video, short form videos and short form even audios now is something that's pretty big.
Yep.
Do you do that as well, or are you mainly written form within remote?
Yeah, different media for different purposes. And the nice thing about text is that it's easy to search through and easy to structure, whereas you cannot easily structure video or audio. And luckily Loom and like Yak and such, they now have transcripts which are okay, not great, but they're okay. And some of them you can search. So that helps. But you need to have some sort of like central place where you record your documentation, your information. And that central place can be different for different projects. You might want to have one for the whole company, for example, but then for different projects, it could be, a particular project management tool, whatever else. But writing things down is nice because it makes things easy to find.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, agreed. I think we've covered async, obviously just an overview, and I really like your not simplistic, but your straightforward, that's the word, straightforward view on that. And I think maybe, I guess maybe people are just overcomplicating things.
Or maybe I'm oversimplifying things. I think it's a bit of both.
You think? Well, I do think that people, like you said, if there's no point if people are just sort of creating meetings just for the sake of creating a meeting, then why is it there in the first place? But no, it's good to hear that. But what I wanted to ask next is really what's in store for remote going forward? What does the future look like? And also from your perspective, you obviously you're a father. You've recently had a second addition to your family. What's in store for you personally as well?
Well, no more kids, Alex. That's we're done with the kids. 2 kids is a lot. Very happy with them, but no more. No, look, Remote's doing really well as a company. We do a few things, but our ambitions are far greater than that. So a lot of exciting things to come out, most of them next year, as the year is ending now. Yeah, for me personally, it's doing that and just enjoying my family. Like, I think we're really ambitious with what we're doing with Remote. It doesn't nearly feel like we are like have arrived to where we want to be. We have a really long path to go. So there's a lot to do.
Well, as a fellow dad myself, I've got 3 kids. You're dealing with different time zones, different, you're in Portugal, right? And then you've got people in the US you've got people, well, all over the world. A big part of my audience are people who are parents who probably working from home sometimes. What would be your biggest piece of advice? Obviously, you've got to be organized. And I think everybody would say that, but what is your biggest piece of advice for people who are trying to find a balance with work and home life, and what would you say?
I would say prioritize what is important, which is your family. Your kids won't give a shit about what you did in your life, in terms of work, whether you were successful or not, whether you were the best or not. So prioritize your family. That's a regret you'll never have. And that's it. Like I actually live in the Netherlands right now. One of the reasons we moved is to be close to my parents, and that's one of the best things I've ever done. So my kids can enjoy their grandparents, and it's really, really nice. And so I prioritize that. I didn't move. If it was for Remote, maybe I would have moved to the US, where many of our customers are. That's not the choice I wanted to make. I would be a terrible leader if I was very unhappy, and I would be unhappy if I couldn't spend time with my kids and if I couldn't prioritize them. And so that's it. And how do you prioritize when you have like a lot of work going on and you can work 24/7? It's by aggressively prioritizing. Block time for your family so that your work doesn't interfere. Put away your phone, or make sure that your phone is you don't have your work applications on your phone, for example, so that there's no work calling you while you're with your family. I think that is a easy trick, but an important one.
It's been great finally to have you on the podcast, and I for one will be keeping an eye on what Remote is doing for the future. And yeah, you're welcome to join us again any time, and you said you got some things in store for 2022. We'd love to hear from you again 2022, just to hear what those updates are. But
Sure.
for now, Job, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Alex.